My father's lawyer stood up in the crowded courtroom, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the judge with a smug grin. "The will is crystal clear, Your Honor," he declared, his voice echoing off the oak-paneled walls. "She gets absolutely nothing, not a single penny, not a single asset." The judge nodded slowly and reached for his heavy wooden gavel, ready to close the case forever. Behind me, my father and his new wife openly clapped in celebration, their quiet laughter cutting through the room like a knife. They thought they had finally destroyed me. They thought I was leaving empty-handed, ruined, and humiliated. But I didn't flinch. As the gavel rose, I slowly opened my manila folder, looked my father straight in his cold eyes, and said, "You forgot one crucial thing. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Vanessa, and at 28 years old, I wear the uniform of an active-duty military officer. You can see the determination in my eyes, a strength I had to build after years of being treated like a ghost in my own family. My father, Victor, is a man consumed by wealth and status. To him, people are just assets to be managed or discarded when they no longer serve a financial purpose. For the last decade, I was the asset he wanted to forget. When my mother passed away years ago, she held my hand in that sterile hospital room and whispered a promise that her legacy would always protect me. But the moment her funeral flowers withered, Victor began systematically erasing her memory from our lives. It didn't take him long to replace her with Meredith, a cold, calculating woman who brought along two spoiled children of her own. Together, they formed a new alliance, one that completely pushed me to the margins. While my step-siblings were showered with expensive cars, Ivy League tuitions, and effortless luxury, I was left to fend for myself. Victor treated my decision to join the military with open mockery, calling it a waste of time for someone from a multi-million-dollar family. But I didn't want his dirty money. I wanted my independence. I grew up fast, finding a real family among my fellow soldiers, while my biological father treated me like a stranger who happened to share his last name. They truly believed they had successfully cast me aside forever. Have you ever been made to feel like an outcast by your own flesh and blood? Comment down below and let me know. The day Victor decided to permanently cut me out of his life started with a cold, formal summons to his grand estate. I arrived in my uniform, a stark contrast to the sprawling, ostentatious luxury of the mansion I used to call home. Victor didn't even look up from his massive oak desk when I walked in. Sitting beside him was Meredith, her fingers glittering with diamonds, a smug expression plastered across her face. Without a word of greeting, my father slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished wood toward me. "Sign these, Vanessa," he commanded, his voice devoid of any parental warmth. "It's a formal waiver relinquishing any and all claims to your late mother's personal family heirlooms, her jewelry, and the small trust she left behind." I picked up the papers, my hand steady, but my chest tightening with a deep, familiar ache. These weren't just assets to me. They were the last tangible connections I had to my mother's history. When I looked up and firmly said, "No, I will never sign these away," Victor's face flushed with sudden volatile fury. He slammed his fist on the desk, declaring that my defiance proved I was no longer a part of his multi-million-dollar estate. He coldly stated that he was cutting me off financially, revoking my access to any future inheritance, and formally disowning me. Meredith didn't hide her triumphant grin as he told me to pack whatever small belongings I had left in the house and get out. I didn't shed a single tear in front of them. I packed my bags, walked out the front door, and never looked back, knowing my military career gave me all the independence I truly needed. 2 weeks after being disowned, I was stationed at a quiet military base, trying to process the absolute finality of my father's betrayal. Surrounded by concrete walls, I began sorting through an old, heavy olive-drab military footlocker. It had belonged to my maternal grandfather, a highly decorated veteran who had passed away when I was just a child. As I lifted out his neatly folded dress uniform and tarnished brass medals, I noticed something strange about the bottom of the trunk. The wood felt slightly uneven, and when I pressed hard on the left corner, a hidden compartment popped open with a soft click. Inside the false bottom lay a thick bundle of yellowed legal documents, tied together with a faded red ribbon. My breath caught as I carefully unrolled them, realizing these weren't military records at all. They were strict, ironclad property deeds and a forgotten, decades-old corporate co-signing agreement. As my eyes scanned the archaic legal phrasing, the puzzle pieces of our family history suddenly shattered and reformed. I discovered that Victor's entire multi-million-dollar business empire was built on a massive lie. My grandfather hadn't just helped finance my father's early business. He had originally purchased the actual, highly valuable land that the corporate headquarters and the entire estate sat upon. Furthermore, the original corporate charter contained a strict bloodline descendant clause. It explicitly stated that the enterprise could never be legally transferred, merged, or sold to an outside party without the verified signature of a direct blood descendant of my mother's lineage. By cutting me out, Victor had completely severed his own legal foundation, unaware that the very ground beneath his feet belonged entirely to the daughter he had just cast aside. I knew I couldn't just walk into a courtroom blindly, so I took the yellowed documents straight to a trusted military legal counsel and hired an independent private investigator. For 3 weeks we worked in absolute secrecy, digging into the dark underbelly of my father's corporate empire. What the investigator, Harrison, uncovered was a calculated web of fraud that made my stomach churn. Victor and his high-priced lawyer, Sterling, had realized the existence of the bloodline clause months ago and had been actively trying to bypass it. They were frantically altering corporate records, falsifying meeting minutes, and even forging my mother's historic signature on modern transfer protocols. Victor was desperate to finalize a massive, multi-million-dollar corporate merger with an overseas conglomerate, a deal that would secure his wealth forever, but completely erase my mother's family legacy. He knew that if the buyers discovered a missing bloodline signature, the entire merger would instantly collapse, leaving him financially ruined. Harrison looked across the table at me, his eyes grave. "We have enough here to stop them right now, Vanessa. We can file an emergency injunction." I stared at the forged documents, my fingers tracing the counterfeit signature of the woman who had loved me unconditionally. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me. "No," I replied softly, shaking my head. "We wait." I decided to let them proceed with their grand plan, allowing Victor and Meredith to believe they were completely untouchable. I wanted them to walk directly into a legal trap of their own making at the exact moment they thought their victory was absolute. The day of the final estate and corporate hearing arrived, a cold and rainy morning that perfectly matched the tension building inside me. I walked into the courtroom wearing my pristine military uniform, standing straight and completely alone on my side of the aisle. Across from me sat Victor, Meredith, and Sterling, looking absolutely triumphant as they whispered among themselves. They had arrived with an aura of untouchable arrogance, expecting a quick, effortless legal victory that would permanently strip me of my remaining family namesakes and finalize their massive merger. The hearing proceeded rapidly, with Sterling confidently presenting the outdated will and the forged corporate transfer documents to the bench. He turned to look at me with a smug, patronizing grin before addressing the judge. His booming voice echoed through the room. "The will is clear, Your Honor. She gets nothing." The judge nodded slowly, in complete agreement with the presentation, and reached out his hand for the heavy wooden gavel to finalize the ruling. Behind me, the quiet sound of my family clapping in celebration cut through the sterile courtroom air. Victor and Meredith were openly smiling, silently toasting to their absolute victory, completely convinced that they had successfully ruined me and erased my mother's legacy forever. They truly believed I was defeated, a broke and disowned daughter leaving with empty hands. But I didn't flinch, and my expression remained completely stoic. Just as the judge prepared to strike the gavel and close the case, I calmly stepped up to the podium. I slowly opened my thick manila folder, looked my father straight in his cold eyes, and said, "You forgot one thing." I calmly stepped forward and handed the certified documents from my grandfather's footlocker to the bailiff, who passed them directly up to the bench. The judge began to skim the paperwork, his eyebrows rising in immediate shock, before he ordered Sterling to review the pages. As my father's lawyer read the text, the smug grin instantly vanished from his face, his skin turned completely pale, and his hands began to visibly shake. The one thing they had completely forgotten was that Victor never actually owned the land or the original corporate charter. It belonged entirely to my mother's bloodline. By executing that fraudulent will and formally cutting me out of the family assets, Victor had inadvertently triggered an immediate ironclad forfeiture clause embedded in the original charter. Legally, his entire business empire and the grand estate instantly defaulted, reverting solely and completely to me as the only living blood descendant. The multi-million-dollar corporate merger was completely and instantly halted by the judge. Because Victor had already signed pre-merger guarantees, the sudden collapse left him personally liable for massive default penalties. In a single moment, my father went from celebrating an absolute victory to facing a mountain of corporate debt and immediate financial ruin. 3 months after that fateful courtroom showdown, the dust finally settled on the ruins of Victor's empire. Unable to pay the massive default penalties, my father and Meredith lost the grand mansion and the business to immediate foreclosure. Today, Victor works as a low-level night manager, while Meredith filed for divorce, leaving him completely alone in his ruin. Justice was absolute. Meanwhile, I assumed full control of the true family assets, selling off the corporate remnants to fund something meaningful. I used the multi-million-dollar fortune to establish a beautiful veteran housing support foundation, dedicated entirely to honoring my mother and grandfather's legacy. Sitting in my office today, looking at my uniform, I know I protected what truly mattered. Greed destroyed them, but integrity built a new future. What would you have done if you were in my uniform? Comment below.